West Asia is at war and India faces a difficult diplomatic challenge. Over the last year, Israel has fought a war in Gaza, taken on the militia Hezbollah, and has also faced the wrath of Iran. As the region is divided deeply by the war, India does not want to take a side. On the one hand, it has its new partnerships in the Arab world that it is working on for investments, technology, and infrastructure. And on the other hand, it has Israel. Israel has emerged as one of India's closest security partners over the last few decades. It has backed India in 4 separate wars, it has joined it to fight terrorism, and is consistently ranked as one of the most respected countries in India. But has the conflict in West Asia and Israel's increasing unpopularity changed all of that? On this episode of Threadbare, we take a look at the India-Israel relationship. We tell you how India and Israel went from being enemies to friends, and why that hard-fought friendship is now facing pressure. In October last year, militant group Hamas launched a devastating attack on Israel, which killed over 1,000 people. India expressed strong backing for Israel immediately after the attack, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi issued a statement of support and solidarity. It was a sign of just how much the India-Israel relationship has changed, because for decades, India maintained a hostile stance towards Israel. India voted against Israel's admission to the United Nations in 1949 and even delayed full diplomatic ties until 1992. The origins of India's hostile policy on Israel can be traced back to the period before independence, during India's struggle against the British colonial rule. In 1917, Britain made the Balfour Declaration, committing to establish a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Following the First World War, Britain facilitated significant Jewish immigration into Palestine, which was predominantly Arab at that time. Now, this is a deeply simplified history, but this British policy ultimately contributed to the creation of Israel in 1948. As India's independence movement gained momentum, leaders such as Jawaharlal Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi viewed the situation in Palestine as part of Britain's divide and rule strategy, which they were also using in India. While India's leaders were sympathetic to the Jewish people, they opposed the establishment of a Jewish homeland that ignored Arab populations. Now, the context here is important. The Indian National Congress was engaged in a fierce struggle with the Muslim League at the time, which attacked the Congress for being a Hindu-only party. By taking up the cause of Palestine, which was popular among Indian Muslims, the Congress hoped to show that it would also support Islamic causes. After India became independent in 1947 and Israel was established in 1948, the first Arab-Israeli war broke out. Now, this conflict not only resulted in many Palestinians becoming refugees, but it also entrenched the ongoing rivalry between Israel and Arab nations. Now, India's initial response to all of this included voting against Israel's entry to the United Nations in 1949. Although it formally recognized Israel in 1950, it stopped short of establishing full diplomatic relations for years, influenced by several factors. One factor was domestic politics. Congress leaders were concerned that support for Israel would not be popular among India's Muslim population. Additionally, India was also a major leader of the non-aligned movement, which meant that it supported a number of anti-imperialist causes around the world. Israel was perceived as a Western ally that was created with the help of Western nations like Britain, and so supporting it conflicted with India's non-aligned stance. Further, India valued its relationships with Arab nations for various economic reasons, particularly the sales of oil, their large number of votes at the United Nations, and also permits for Indians to work in Arab countries. India also wanted to make sure that the Arab world didn't get too close to Pakistan, and supporting a cause like Palestine was a good way to show India's support for the Arab world. For some decades, India actively tried to make life harder for Israel. In 1955, India actually allowed Israel to be excluded from the Bandung Conference. This was a major meeting of newly independent nations across Africa and Asia. In 1956, India condemned Israel during the Suez Crisis, when Israel tried to attack Egypt to take control of the Suez Canal. Now, these incidents caused serious tensions between the two countries. But despite that, Israel was still keen to closely work with India. During the 1962 India-China War, Israel provided military assistance to India. And if you hadn't heard of this, it's probably because India's government did not openly acknowledge this role that Israel played. It did so again during the 1965 war with Pakistan. Meanwhile, in both those conflicts, India's Arab partners did not provide strong support and remained diplomatically neutral. So India was effectively sacrificing its relationship with Israel to keep the Arab world happy, while it wasn't getting anything in return. Despite this, nothing changed in India's policy towards Israel. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi strongly condemned Israel's actions during the 1967 and 1973 Arab-Israeli wars. And in 1975, India backed the infamous Zionism resolution at the UN, which attacked the controversial ideology which called for the creation of a Jewish homeland as a form of racism. Once again, despite all of this, Israel provided support to India during the 1971 India-Pakistan war. And once again, India's policy remained hostile towards Israel. Ties did not really improve until Rajiv Gandhi took office in 1984. He met the Israeli Prime Minister and also eased a sports boycott on Israel at events like the 1987 Davis Cup. All of this led to 1992, when Prime Minister Nasrallah Rao's government finally established diplomatic relations with Israel. There were a few reasons why that happened. First, the Cold War had ended, and ideological divisions between Israel and India, between imperialism and anti-imperialism, just mattered less. India decided that it wanted to be pragmatic and not have an ideological foreign policy. So as I said before, being an anti-imperialist power opposed to Israel and America just wasn't something India wanted anymore. Second, Israel and Palestine began negotiating the Oslo Accords, which reduced tensions between them for a time, and allowed India to make the controversial decision of establishing full diplomatic ties with Israel. Since then, bilateral ties with Israel have largely been unstoppable. In 1992, bilateral trade stood at $200 billion, and in 2022, that figure was at $10 billion. Besides trade, Israel has become one of India's top suppliers of defense equipment, which includes anti-missile systems, high-tech radars, and night vision equipment. Politically, Israel has also backed India on sensitive issues like Kashmir. At the same time, the bilateral relationship enjoys strong public support in both countries. A Pew survey actually found that Israelis view India more positively than any other country, while similar surveys of Indians show that Israel enjoys a significant degree of trust among the Indian public. In 2017, Prime Minister Narendra Modi became the first Indian leader to visit Israel, which represented a significant milestone. The reaction from Prime Minister Modi and the Indian public in the aftermath of the terror attacks in Israel in October 2023 reflects just how far the bilateral relationship has traveled. But there are once again significant pressures on the relationship. Israel's war in Gaza has killed 40,000 people, which has led to large-scale international condemnation of its actions. So far, India has avoided deep criticism of Israel. It has repeatedly abstained at United Nations votes that condemn Israel for its actions in Gaza and call for an arms embargo against Israel. It has also maintained political contacts with Israel. In fact, a controversy was stirred up when media reports alleged that India was sending munitions to Israel during the conflict in Gaza. But India has also voted against Israel for human rights violations against Palestinians and against illegal settlements on Palestinian territory. It has also expressed its concerns about the widespread fear that the Middle East could be falling into a wider war. For some time now, India has had a careful balancing act in the Middle East. It has built solid partnerships with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates based on investments, connectivity, and oil. On the other hand, it cooperates with Israel on technology, cybersecurity, and defense. It has avoided weighing in on the Palestine issue too much, although it still provides economic aid and recognizes the Palestinian state. But now, Israel is once again at the center of a major conflict in the region, and working with Israel can be controversial for India. For example, Israel's parliament, also known as the Knesset, recently voted against the two-state solution, which grants an independent state to both Israel and Palestine. This reflects an increasing view in Israel that working with the Palestinians in good faith is impossible. But the two-state solution is the absolute cornerstone of India's policy on the Israel-Palestine issue. So Israel's rejection of the two-state solution puts India in an awkward position. Israel's war in Gaza has also made it unpopular among major Middle Eastern countries. So India's job of maintaining good ties with countries like Iran on one side and Israel on the other becomes much harder if the two countries are fighting a war in the region. Tensions over Israel have also hurt India-backed projects like the India-Middle East Economic Corridor, or IMEC. This is a massive connectivity project including several Arab nations, America, and the European Union. But getting the IMEC done relied on normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, since both countries are essential to any connectivity project in the region. Since the Israel-Hamas war broke out, that normalization seems impossible, and so IMEC has stalled. Or take the I2U2, a new diplomatic arrangement including Israel, the United Arab Emirates, America, and India. This was going to lead to billions of dollars of investments flowing into India. But since Arab countries like the UAE are finding it difficult to even be seen with Israel right now, the I2U2 is going to face trouble. And all of this is foreign policy. There is also a domestic problem. Some prominent political figures like Congress leader Priyanka Gandhi have been extremely critical of Israel's policy on Gaza. The Congress party, which is the country's main opposition force, has called for a different policy that takes on Israel for its actions in Gaza. So should the opposition come into power in India, the relationship with Israel could suffer. India and Israel have managed to build a close relationship after decades and decades of tension and distrust. But the war in Gaza, a widening conflict in West Asia, and domestic politics in both Israel and India could pose a threat to that relationship. It's a scenario that India will want to avoid. Thank you for watching Threadbare with me, Shashank Bhattu. You can catch us again next week on India Today Global.